Nah. The voicemail came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, still in my scrubs, eating cold pad thai out of a takeout container because I hadn't had time to eat since 6 that morning. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. My brother's name. I let it go to voicemail. Not because I was busy. Not because I was tired. Though I was exhausted in that particular way you get when you spent 12 hours on your feet advocating for other people's mothers while your own mother hadn't called you in 4 months. I let it go because something in my gut said, whatever this is, you need to be ready before you hear it. I finished the pad thai. I took 3 slow breaths. Then I pressed play. Hey. It's me. His voice was careful, practiced. Listen, I don't want to make this weird, but Mom and Dad's accountant has been trying to reach you. Something about Grandma Loretta's estate paperwork? They just need a signature. Nothing major. Call me back. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. Nothing major. That's what my brother said the week he asked me to co-sign a loan I never saw the terms of. That's what my father said when he moved my grandmother into assisted living without consulting me, even though I was the one who'd been driving her to every doctor's appointment for 2 years. Nothing major was their phrase for everything that was, in fact, enormous. I should back up. My name is Nora. I'm 31 years old. I'm a nurse at a regional hospital in Ohio, which means I have good instincts about when something is wrong and zero patience for people who tell me everything is fine when it clearly isn't. I have a younger brother named Garrett who lives in Scottsdale and works in something vague he calls consulting. I have parents, my father, Dale, and my mother, Rhonda, who retired to a lake house in Tennessee 4 years ago, right around the time Grandma Loretta's health started declining. I don't think the timing was a coincidence. Grandma Loretta was my father's mother. She was 81, sharp, until the very end, and she had spent her entire adult life building something real. She and my grandfather had owned 3 dry cleaning businesses in central Ohio, nothing glamorous but steady, honest work. When my grandfather died in 2009, she sold 2 of the businesses and held onto the third until 2019, when her arthritis made it impossible to keep going. By then, the proceeds from everything, plus 40 years of careful saving, had added up to just over $890,000. She used to tell me about it directly, not to brag, just because she wanted me to know. Nora, she'd say, when I'd come sit with her on Sunday afternoons. I didn't go to college. I didn't have connections, but I paid attention and I didn't spend what I didn't have. That's the whole secret. She had a will. She'd had one since 1998. I know because she showed it to me herself. 3 years before she died, when I drove her to her attorney's office for what she called a routine review. I sat in the waiting room while she was inside for about 40 minutes. When she came out, she patted my hand and said, "Everything's in order. You're taken care of, sweetheart. You and your brother both equal shares. The rest goes to St. Jude's." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She passed away in February, 14 months before my brother left that voicemail. Pneumonia, which moved fast the way it does in older patients. I was holding her hand. My father was there. My mother flew in the night before but spent most of that last day on the phone in the hallway, which I found strange but didn't say anything about because grief takes people differently and I was trying to be generous. Garrett didn't make it in time. He said his flight was delayed. The weeks after were a blur of paperwork and phone calls and casseroles from neighbors. My parents handled most of the estate logistics, which made sense. My father was her son after all. I was busy with work. I asked twice about the will and was told both times that everything was being processed and that I'd be contacted by the attorney when the time came. Months passed. Then more months. I sent an email to my father in August asking for an update. He replied, "The estate is complex. There are taxes involved. These things take time. Don't worry." I called my mother in October. She said, "Nora, honestly, you asking about money right now is a little distasteful. We just lost her." We lost her in February. It was October. I let it go again. I don't know why I kept letting it go. I think I wanted to believe that my family was not the kind of family that would do what I was starting to suspect they might be doing. It's easier to doubt yourself than to accept that the people who are supposed to protect you have decided you're not worth protecting. Then came the voicemail from Garrett, the one about the signature. Nothing major. I didn't call him back that night. Instead, I called my grandmother's attorney. His name was Theodore Wainwright, and his office was 30 minutes from my apartment. I had his card because my grandmother had given it to me herself years ago, tucked into a birthday card she'd sent with a note that said in her handwriting, "In case you ever need him," she knew. I think she knew even then. I reached his assistant the next morning and left a message. Mr. Wainwright called me back within 2 hours, which told me he'd been expecting to hear from me. "Ms. Nora," he said, "I was wondering when you'd reach out." He spoke carefully. He told me that the will he had on file, the one my grandmother had reviewed in his office, the one that split her estate equally between me and Garrett with a charitable donation to St. Jude's, was not the will that had been submitted to probate. I made him repeat that. He repeated it. The will submitted to probate was dated 11 months before my grandmother died. In it, the estate was split differently. Garrett received 40%. My parents, as a unit, received 55%. I received 5%. 5. He said there had been a codicil added, a modification, signed apparently by my grandmother with 2 witnesses, restructuring the distribution. He said that when he had tried to reach me directly after my grandmother's passing, he had been told by my father that I was not emotionally stable enough to handle estate communications, and that all correspondence should go through him. I had to set the phone down for a moment. Not emotionally stable enough. I was a nurse. I managed codes. I held people's hands when they died. I had held my grandmother's hand when she died, and my father had told her attorney that I was too fragile to receive a phone call about my own inheritance. I picked the phone back up. "Mr. Wainwright," I said, "is the codicil legitimate?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is a question I have had some concerns about for several months. If you would like to come in and discuss those concerns, I am available Thursday." I was there Thursday morning with a legal pad and a list of questions. What he told me over the next 90 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about the previous 3 years. My grandmother had begun showing signs of mild cognitive decline in the months before the codicil was signed. Nothing that would have been obvious to a casual observer, but Mr. Wainwright had noticed changes when he'd spoken with her on the phone. She'd repeated herself. She'd seemed uncertain about details she would normally have had sharp recall on. He had noted this in his own file. The 2 witnesses on the codicil were not independent parties. One was a neighbor who'd become close with my parents after they moved my grandmother to a facility 40 minutes from their lake house. A facility, I would later find out, that they had chosen specifically because it was far from me. The other witness's signature was illegible, and when Mr. Wainwright had attempted to verify it, the name did not match any resident or staff member at the facility. He told me, already filed a confidential report with the State Bar's Elder Law Oversight Division. But he needed a family member with legal standing to formally contest the codicil. "That's you," he said, "if you want it to be." I thought about my grandmother sitting across from me in his waiting room, patting my hand. "Everything's in order, sweetheart." "Yes," I said, "I want it to be." I hired an attorney the following week. Her name was Joanna, and she had spent 15 years specializing in elder financial abuse cases. When I laid out everything I had, Mr. Wainwright's concerns, the timeline, the questionable witness, the months of being deliberately kept out of communication, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "This is not a subtle case." The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly, then all at once. Joanna filed a formal challenge to the codicil on the grounds of undue influence and potential fraud. This triggered a court-supervised review of the estate, which meant an independent administrator was appointed. That administrator had subpoena power. My parents did not know the administrator had subpoena power until the bank records arrived. What those records showed was not just the inheritance restructuring. It was a pattern. Over the last 2.5 years of my grandmother's life, after she had been moved to the facility near the lake house, there had been a series of transfers from her personal accounts. Small at first, $400 here, $800 there. Then larger. Then very large. A transfer of $34,000 described in the memo line as home repair reimbursement. Another $22,500 described as medical expenses. A transfer of $61,000 with no memo at all. The total, across 31 separate transactions, was just over $210,000. My grandmother's accounts, at the time of her death, held $187,000. The will, the real one, had anticipated roughly $400,000 in liquid assets available for distribution, in addition to the real property. My parents had drained more than $200,000 from an 81-year-old woman with cognitive decline while telling her family she was being cared for. I had to take a walk around the block when Joanna told me the numbers. I walked for about 20 minutes. Then I came back and sat down and said, "What do we do next?" What we did next was contact the county district attorney's office. I want to be clear about something because I've since learned that a lot of people don't know how this works. I did not press charges. I couldn't. In criminal cases, charges are filed by the district attorney's office on behalf of the state, not by victims. The DA decides whether to prosecute based on the evidence, not on what I wanted or didn't want. All I did was give the investigators everything I had and answer their questions honestly. They had a lot of questions. Garrett had questions too, once he found out what was happening. He called me 4 times in 1 week. The first call was to tell me I was blowing up the family. The second call was to remind me how hard our parents' retirement had been financially. As if that explained anything. The third call was to suggest that maybe Grandma Loretta had wanted to give them that money and just hadn't written it down properly. The fourth call was to tell me he was just as much a victim as I was. That fourth call was the most interesting one, because it arrived 3 days after Joanna had requested his financial records as part of the broader discovery process, and it turned out that Garrett had received 2 wire transfers from my parents during the period in question, one for $18,000 and one for $12,500, described in their records as family gifts. I did not answer the fourth call. My parents hired an attorney. Their attorney sent Joanna a letter proposing a settlement. They would agree to return $150,000 to the estate and the remaining assets would be redistributed closer to the original will's terms, with the codicil formally invalidated. In exchange, we would drop our request that the DA's office be provided with additional evidence. Joanna brought me the letter on a Wednesday afternoon. She set it on the table between us. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about 31 transactions. I thought about the word reimbursement typed into a memo field to describe money taken from a woman who was losing her ability to track her own finances. I thought about my father telling her attorney that I was too unstable to receive a phone call. "Send it back," I said. "The whole letter? We're not settling. Give the DA everything." The criminal case took 14 months. I won't walk through every step because some of it is still painful and some of it is ongoing, but I'll tell you the outcome. My father pleaded guilty to 1 count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. My mother pleaded no contest to the same charge. Both were sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, required to pay full restitution to the estate, $210,000 plus interest, and permanently barred from serving as a fiduciary for any other person. They were also ordered to pay a portion of Mr. Mystery Wainwright's legal costs for the time he had spent documenting his concerns. Garrett's wire transfers were reviewed separately. He was not charged with a crime. However, the civil case determined that the $30,500 he'd received constituted improperly distributed estate funds, and he was required to return it before final distribution could occur. He has not spoken to me since the ruling. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Some days I miss the brother I thought he was. Most days I remind myself that person may never have existed. The estate was distributed according to my grandmother's original will, equal shares, and the donation to St. Kenta, Jude's went through, which was the part that made me sit in my car and cry for a while, because she had wanted that and it had almost been taken from her along with everything else. Mr. Wainwright retired 6 months after the case closed. At his last day in the office, his assistant told me he kept her card on his desk. The birthday card my grandmother had sent me with his number tucked inside. He said it reminded him why he'd done elder law for 30 years. I still work at the hospital. Same unit, same scrubs, same cold takeout in the parking garage on hard nights. I don't regret any of the decisions I made once I started making them. The only thing I regret is how long I spent doubting myself. How many months I let go by because I wanted to believe my family was better than they were. How many times I heard nothing major and chose to believe it. My grandmother knew who I was. She planned ahead. She put a card in an envelope with a phone number and a note, and she trusted me to use it when the time came. I was just glad I finally did. I used to think that loyalty meant staying quiet, that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping the family together. For a long time, I confused those two things. And that confusion cost me, not just money, not just months of being deliberately shut out, but something harder to name. The version of myself that trusted automatically, that assumed the best because the alternative was too uncomfortable to sit with. What happened with my parents and Garrett didn't come out of nowhere. I can see that now. The pattern was there for years. In the way my father handled decisions without asking. In the way my mother reframed my questions as emotional instability. In the way Garrett stayed conveniently distant until there was something to gain. People who take advantage of others don't usually start with something large. They start small. They test. They wait to see if anyone pushes back. When no one does, they go further. My grandmother's cognitive decline wasn't a tragedy they responded to. It was, in the cruelest reading of the evidence, and the evidence was extensive, an opportunity they moved toward. That's the part I have to sit with. Not with anger, though the anger was real and I don't think it was wrong, but with the understanding that what they did was a choice, made over and over across 31 transactions, across months of redirected mail and unanswered questions, and a phone call to a lawyer telling him I was too fragile to be informed about my own grandmother's estate. Every single one of those was a decision, and decisions have weight. They accumulate. Eventually, they become a record, and records, it turns out, can be subpoenaed. I think about the card my grandmother sent me. The phone number tucked inside. She didn't explain it. She didn't say, "You'll need this someday," or, "I'm worried about what might happen." She just put it there, quietly, because she had lived long enough to know that the people who love you sometimes need to be protected from the people who are supposed to love you. That was her intelligence? Not formal, not credentialed. Just the deep, practical wisdom of someone who had paid attention her whole life. What I learned from going through all of this is that integrity isn't only about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you're willing to do when doing the right thing is genuinely hard, when it costs you something real, when the people on the other side of the table are your parents, when every instinct you have is telling you to find a way to make it okay, to settle, to not be the person who broke the family apart. I had to get honest with myself about what I actually owed the people who had already decided I wasn't worth a phone call. I didn't blow up my family. They had already made their choices. I just finally made mine. Grandma Loretta's donation to St. Manny. Jude's went through. Equal shares just like she'd planned. And somewhere in that, I found something I hadn't expected. Not closure exactly, but something steadier than I'd had before. The knowledge that I had shown up for her, even after she was gone, that turned out to be enough.